You're tuned into 9 to 5 Work Rebels with your host, Ebony Gale. This podcast is sponsored by the PRCA's Race, Ethnicity and Equity Board. Visit prca.org.uk/REEB to find out more.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Gems in Comms series special, brought to you by 9 to 5 Work Rebels podcast. I'm your host, Ebony Gale. Today, I'm pleased to be speaking with Nalini Ramanah, experienced marketing communications specialist and founder of Nalini Communications. Nalini, welcome.
Hello, thanks, Ebony, for having me.
You are most welcome. So just to give you a bit of background for those that may be new to the podcast, essentially, this podcast is about giving people of colour working in the communication sector their flowers for carving out a great career for yourselves, and particularly in an industry that is 91% white. So kudos to you. Well done to you, Nalini.
Thank you. I can just thank you, Ebony, just to give people this opportunity. So it's really important. I think we often don't have the opportunity to give back. So thank you for providing a platform and doing that.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. It's all about giving flowers out to you great people. So absolutely. So first question is, can you tell us about yourself and what it is that you do?
So I'm Nalini. I've been in communications for coming up to 20 years now. Starting to show my age, I'm sure, if I say that out loud. But I've been working with different sectors. I've worked public sector, private sector, working on crisis communications, brand, refreshes. I've done, change management. So I've done a real host of things in comms. And I think what's really amazing about comms is it gives you that exposure to do lots of different things. And there's so much you can do in marketing and comms. It's great. It never gets boring. So I've been making my way, and then I've decided to start out on my own. I started that this year, so I launched Nalini Communications, and it's about helping clients to reach their best and effective communications and get the results they want. So that's pretty much what I'm doing in the space at the moment.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so have you always sort of wanted to work in marketing communications? What was it that attracted you to the industry?
So it's a really interesting story. So just to sort of dial it back, I suppose, is that so when I was thinking about going to university, my parents and I and my sister had a conversation about what I would do at university. So my mum's from Trinidad and Tobago, my dad's from Mauritius, so both of Indian heritage. And that sort of sit around under the table and talk about what you want to do. So we had this conversation. I wanted to go and do theatre studies. And they were like, it's not academic enough, don't do that. So scrap that, went back to the drawing board, found a course in PR and advertising in Bournemouth University. And I was like, I want to go and do this. This is what I want to do now. And they were like, still not academic enough, scratch that, go back to the drawing board. This is So then I decided to do international relations and politics and wanted to go to Sussex, didn't get the grades to get in, but went to Coventry University and did that. And I think what's really interesting is that idea of doing PR and advertising, like really early on, and then being told, oh, actually, it's not really for you. So try something else that's more academic, and then going that route, and then going, actually, I found my way back into what I wanted to do originally. Is just really quite funny. I think that is quite, I look back on that and think, had I just gone the route I wanted to go, would save myself, a couple of years of just not knowing what I wanted to do. So I think I have a passion for something, and others say don't do it. It's just like, screw them and do it. That would be my advice to people.
Yeah, I hear that. I completely understand that. And I can kind of relate to that because I suppose I went to the Brit school and I'd done a bit of dance, but I'd done graphic design, and I was kind of creative and I liked dance, but dance wasn't necessarily taken seriously, from a family perspective. It just looked at like, something you just do on the side, like the creative side, like you said. And it's just really interesting that you really wanted to do PR and advertising and, the comedy side of things, and then got steered away from it because it didn't seem as professional maybe enough to your parents. And that's what's really interesting about even the profession, because you have, the Chartered Institute of Public Relations and others that are out there trying to sort of increase the professionalism of the industry. Obviously, right now, it's much more seen as a professional environment. But I think it's interesting that a lot of parents always go for the traditional types of careers, and they don't see that this is really an interesting career for those. And for you, you've come full circle anyway. You still ended up back where you wanted to start out. And so I think that's really cool. And even you mentioned advertising. I used to want to get into advertising until I sort of started looking at it and started to realize that, you know, the creative side and then the account management side were very separate. So I was like, well, at least in PR, you get to do a bit of both. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's probably why I kind of gravitated that way. But I think that's really interesting. Very interesting in terms of you coming right full circle. Amazing. I like that. Thank you for sharing. So moving on a little bit into sort of your lived experience. So I always ask all my guests, you know, when did you become aware of your ethnicity? So I always share this story about me being about 11 years old, going to secondary school, and then hearing about Chelsea Smilers who would go and attack Black and brown people and would cut their face with a razor, and which is called the Chelsea Smile. Quite horrific, and definitely an eye-opening experience for me being the 11-year-old going off to school. Obviously, I always knew you're Black. I'm Black in my skin, but, you know, it was that moment where it was like, oh my God, like, this is absolutely insane. Like, these people are crazy. They're going to try and just attack me for just the way I've been born, you know? And was there any sort of experience for you that was that kind of stark realization that, okay, we have to kind of operate a bit different in society?
Yeah, there was a couple. But just on your Chelsea Smiler story, I remember that very much in my childhood and being absolutely scared of the same thing. Yeah. So I just wanted to share that with you because
Well, thank you. Yeah. I know, it's horrible.
Yeah, back then it really was. So there was a couple of instances, and I think having a name like Nalini, I've always been that child in the classroom, especially back when I was a child.
Yeah.
Things now with a variety of different names, but my name was that name that they'd get to the register and they'd go to call my name and they'd stop, and I would have to put my hand up and be like, I'm here, miss, because they just wouldn't even attempt to pronounce it. So, you know, my first name. So
it's not even hard. You can just sound it out. Nalini, it's not difficult. Oh my God.
Don't even try. And so being that child in primary school and having to sort of almost have that, carry that sense of my name is too complicated or too difficult, so I've got to, you know, hold back, was really hard. And I think, you know, my last name being Ramanah, it was just, they just didn't do it. They just wouldn't say it. So that was the sort of first sort of thinking of actually something's different. And I think when I was thinking about starting out on my own, it felt right to own my name, because I spent a lot of time not owning it as a child, going, I'm just here, miss, and not saying it or not correcting people. So it just felt right. But the time that I really realized that people saw my color was when I was in a swimming lesson. I was in a swimming pool, and two girls, I was in the changing room, two white girls that came up to me, English girls, and said, "Oh, you a Paki?" And I didn't know what a Paki was, and so I just said yes, because, you know, back then, if I said no, I wouldn't know what that would have meant, and so I just sort of said yes. And then I remember going home to my parents and saying, "What is a Paki?" They've been asked this question. What does that mean? And my parents explained it to me. So I think it's almost like other people saw it before I saw it, or playground where it's like you can't, you know, when you're playing kiss chase as children in primary school, you can't kiss the white boys because you're brown. So it's those sorts of things that, looking back, I've gone, oh, other people are aware of it a lot more than I was. Sometimes I forget it because it's how you are. You don't sort of walk in thinking, I'm walking into a room as a brown person. You just walk in as you. So I think it's always been there, and it's kind of been pointed out to me by other people.
So interesting, isn't it, how young it starts in terms of that, you know, obviously they say, you know, children are products of our environment, but you just see how much is absorbed in the youth, because you talk about kiss chase, and I thought, actually, that's a good point. You know, you wouldn't be allowed to necessarily kiss the white boys, and, you know, that's such a key part, your formative years, do you know what I mean? And these are the things that are taking place. So it's really horrible, really. And to be called a Paki by two girls, you must have been thinking, what on earth? Obviously, you didn't know what it is. And then when your parents must have been horrified to go back and tell them that. Like, they must have been like, what on earth is going on at her school?
Yeah, well, this was swimming lessons, so they were just even more.
Wow.
So they were just. I think the thing is that back then my parents were very much about, and a lot of parents that came across, immigrants that came across, they were very much about assimilating and not being seen. And so I think somehow unconsciously or consciously that was taught to us, you know, as children, that you don't, you know, you don't be seen. So, you know, I was blessed with the name that I've got, but I have two other sisters that have very sort of more Western names. There's always the point of difference in that way as well.
It must have been hard for you as well. But at some point she was younger thinking, why didn't I just have a name like that or a name like that? Because I mean, my name's Ebony. It means black. So like, it's not that hard to guess what I am. But at the same time, I think growing up, I used to think, oh, why didn't I have a name like this? Why didn't I have a name like that? But actually, I love my name now. So,
Exactly.
interesting, isn't it? Interesting. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that experience. So, moving into kind of the career side of things, have you ever felt like your race, ethnicity has held you back in your career?
Definitely. And I think it's one of those where sometimes you don't know it. So sometimes it's where you have been overlooked for promotion, or you're working and delivering the job. And if that was a white counterpart, they would have been promoted, and they would have got that, that salary increase. And probably you haven't, because you've just kept your head down and got on with it. But I think it's not just race. I think it's your gender. I think as a woman, that plays into it. I have dyslexia, so I think the disability plays into it. So I think that it's quite multi-layered. I think sometimes you can be in a role and see others progress and you're not. And it's almost like, well, which one is it? Is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I'm ethnic? Is it because I have a disability? It can be multi-layered. But I think that it's definitely played a role. And I think it's interesting because I think it can be really subtle. So if I reflect back on some conversations I've had, sometimes you haven't even realized that they have some connotations based on your ethnicity, and that's a question. You haven't thought of it in that way. But then you think, would they have a conversation with someone who wasn't ethnic?
That way. Yeah, absolutely. It's true. And a lot of it is when you kind of step away from it and look back and think, what do they mean by that? Or, because like you said, sometimes you just take it on face value, and then you might think a bit later on, like, oh, well, that was a bit of a weird conversation, because I haven't seen you have that conversation with Claire or with whoever else. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I can understand that. Absolutely. So, when have you actually experienced racism or witnessed it in the workplace? And if so, how was it handled?
So it's interesting because so not in comms, to give you an example, when I was at university, I would come back in summer and work on different bars as a sort of bartender type role. And I was working for the Oval actually, and I had gone to the Oval, had a bar that I was going to work at, and there was a white woman, a young girl there, not dissimilar in age to myself, and a brown guy and myself. And we got there, and so the setup was that you set the bar up, was doing that. Then the white guy that was managing the bars came along, and he said to the white girl, have you got your staff? And she said, yes, I've just got these two members of staff. And he turned to me and said, have you worked on a bar before? I said, yes, I have. And he turned to her and said, she speaks good English. And I remember being really horrified and sort of had to say, look, I was born and bred here. And I was just really kind of like, wow, that's out there, like
outright racist.
I just couldn't even believe. And he didn't acknowledge it and just walked on and just felt quite comfortable with what he'd said. And I think this is the thing. I think there's different times in your life, or different industries can show it in different ways. So in comms it can be quite subtle. You don't realize it sometimes until you've had a conversation and gone, hang on a minute, I was passed over for whether that's a promotion or I've had to jump through so many hoops. And got that. So I think there is that subtle, it's just very, very, it's almost like you haven't realized it's happening sometimes. And that's the thing I think is actually a bit more dangerous, actually.
It is. And it's interesting you say that, because it just reminds me of when I worked at the GMC, General Medical Council, and I used to work in their press office, and I remember getting a call from a doctor, because we had calls from the press, but also sometimes lots of people call in with some issues. And, it's very old-ish. You could hear that he sounded, older, and a very posh doctor who was talking about, him being in his penthouse. And I was helping him with a query that he had. And towards the ending, he was like, okay, yeah, thanks for your help. What was your name? So then I said, Ebony. And he was absolutely shocked. He said, Ebony, are you coloured? Was what he said down the phone. So I said, no, I'm not coloured, I'm black. And he was like, wow, you sound so professional. I would have had no idea. So I just thought, honestly, like, it's just disgraceful behavior. So yeah, I get that. You know, people just make these assumptions. You know, they hear you, they feel like, oh well, you can't be a person of color to speak this particular way, or like they look at you and think, oh well, okay, you speak good English. Well, I'm actually born here. It even reminded me of a time I came back from Jamaica, a holiday in Jamaica. Came back, going through customs, you know, as usual, walking past, and the guy says to me, "Oh, he decided to check my stuff. Obviously, you know, black girl coming through. He's checked my stuff and coming from Jamaica, of course. So you know, must be a red alert." And then he's checked my stuff. Obviously, it's fine. Gone through, and he's told me to enjoy my holiday here. And I'm like, I'm actually back home. Actually, do you know what I mean? So it's like, and that was at the airport. So I just thought, yeah. So that wasn't, you know, again, it wasn't something that I went and escalated. But in hindsight, I think, you know, maybe I should have. But again, you know, I know your example with the guy in the bar. Obviously, there wasn't much you could do in terms of escalating because he's the boss, he's giving you that attitude, and he's just walked off, and you're just there for your job. So difficult. So would you say there's ever been a time where you wish you maybe spoken up about something, or you had to maybe self-advocate or maybe speak up on somebody else's behalf around maybe issues of racism or things that were kind of mishandled in the workplace?
I think that I've always looked to speak up. So if I've seen something, I have said, and I think it's how you do it. So I think sometimes you don't want to call it out and embarrass others if they haven't been aware as well. So I have always said, and I've done it for numerous things. So it's not just race. I've done it for gender. So I've been the sort of BAME. I hate that term, but that person on the panel. Yeah. Or interviews, and then it's a man and a woman being interviewed, and the woman's more qualified, but the man would be a bigger hole in the organization. And what they've done was promote the man throughout the last year, and they've come to this point of interviewing them. And, you know, it's almost like, well, actually, if we lose a guy, now he's got all these relationships across the organization, that's going to be a bigger hole in the organization, even though the woman's more qualified and could have done the same with the same platform. And I've spoken out on that and said, well, actually, this is the lay of the land. And I think it's really important to do that. I think you have to be the voice in the room so that people know that you're there. I've now, so like I said, I have dyslexia. I have an organization where there was an English white guy, and he wasn't very good at reading and wasn't very good at writing, and the employers thought that he was thick, essentially. And I said, no, he's not thick. He just has dyslexia. And they were like, well, how do you know? I said, because I have dyslexia. And their face. And they were just almost like, oh, we didn't know. Because the connotations and assumptions that go with having dyslexia, that you can't read or write, you know, that's
ridiculous.
Yeah. So it's that kind of thing where I spoke out. And it did cost me. I ended up having to confess to my team that I was dyslexic and making them work in a certain way. And it's, you know, so it came at a personal cost, but it wouldn't be something I'd change, because I think you have to be that voice in the room. And I think that if you don't be that voice in the room, advocate for others who are less able to, or even unaware, then it doesn't stop the behaviors happening. So I think it's really important. And some people don't want to do it. They don't want to pay a personal cost, and that's fine. I think that if we want to see the change, we have to advocate.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like if you want to see the change, you have to be part of the change. But I do agree there's some people who don't necessarily feel comfortable yet to do that. And I think that's fine. I think it takes time to get there for some people, you know. But yeah, that's a really horrible situation to have to, for one, you know, someone being referred to as thick because you're dyslexic is just absolutely disgusting. So I'm really glad that you spoke up. And that must have been hard for you to have to go and then, you know, have to open up yourself in that way and be vulnerable, essentially, you know. But that's well done to you, because actually you probably helped to change their perspective, because they're sitting there looking at you thinking, oh, well, I had no idea. And, you know, she's very good at what she does. So hopefully you helped to change their perception of, you know, what dyslexia looks like. So thank you for sharing that as well. So I wanted to move into kind of like question around code switching, which I think is really interesting. Like, do you feel like we can lead with our authentic voices in the workplace, or will we be forever kind of code switching? Because I feel like we always have to code switch to a degree. You know, that's just how I personally feel.
I think, do you know, I honestly think we just do it automatically without thinking. So I think that it's when people go, oh, you talk really well. And it's like, well, how do you think I was going to talk? Or when they are surprised that you've arrived on time, or that you have prepared. I think it's almost like we do it just, I think it's inbuilt sometimes because we're always thinking, well, what are they going to think if we don't? You know, if I turn up and and don't, you know, be my best self, what are they going to think? So I think we do it automatically without thinking. And I think that I definitely have a telephone voice. You know, there's definitely a lead with a telephone voice. It's not much different to this, but you know, there is that. So I think that, yeah, I would say I would be lying to say I don't, but I don't know that I'm doing it. Probably that's probably the truth, because it's become so ingrained. It's almost like it took a long time for me to bring my whole self to work, and I'm still not sure how comfortable I'm with that as a concept, because I think that it's a double-edged sword. They want your whole self, but they don't really want all of your baggage. So then, is it really your whole self? So I think there is that sense of you're led to believe that they want to see the whole of you, and then sometimes when you do bring that, it's too much. So I think I think we'll always have it. I think. You know,
I believe that too. I feel like that. And you're quite right. I feel like sometimes it's inherent, and it comes sometimes, I think, from some of our parents who are immigrants who wanted to kind of assimilate as well. And so we were taught a lot of the time, you know, to make sure, you know, we be on time, make sure you do this, make sure you do that. And so I do feel like, some of it is just naturally within us to just kind of switch it up a little bit, because we know that, you know, as much as, like you say they want to bring your full self to work, but sometimes if the full self is not exactly what they really want, you know. So I think it's interesting. It is an interesting one, and I agree.
I would say, Ebony, I mean, think about the amount of times that you've met someone who's ethnic and they've gone by another name.
Yes.
That simply, I mean, I remember my parents, and my dad is Papana, and he called himself Peter. And I remember for years going, why is he calling himself Peter? I don't understand this. You know, that's not your name. But it's that thing where you come in and so I think, you know, sometimes I've shortened my name in roles that I've had, just because I've just not want to go through the angst of having to educate people how to say my name. So it's that whole thing where I think sometimes you just, those little things you do and you don't realize you're doing them, those are the things that you're doing just to assimilate and to get by.
Get by, exactly. It is really to get by, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Really interesting. It's interesting, like you said about your dad and the names as well, because I think the names are a massive situation, absolutely. Which is why you've got more people talking about doing blind recruitment and things like that these days, because of the fact that, you know, you've got those who prejudice just based on names. So it's interesting that, and it makes sense. Unfortunately, it's a sad but true situation where people have had to do that, like your dad, just to get by in life. No doubt. So yeah, really interesting. Okay, so wanted to get your thoughts on, like, you know, when did you become aware of the color bias within the sort of comms sector itself?
Oh, do you know, I think if you've worked in comms and you've walked into any room where there's a leadership team and you look around the table and you don't see someone like you, it's like from that day.
Yeah.
And I think that unfortunately in comms, there's too much of that.
Yeah.
And there are too many people that don't look like you and don't have your lived experiences, and then can't give the best to some of the comms they're putting out there because they don't understand how that's going to land.
Yeah.
And I think I've worked at some public sector organisations who have just missed that they need people around the table that look like their residents or look like the audience they're conveying the message to. And that's been a real shame. So I think I've noticed it from day one, if I'm honest. I don't think everyone in comms does it, that is of is ethnic, and it's really hard. And I think in comms you still have a lot of males in the industry as well that don't, you know, as women you can't relate to in that way.
Yeah.
So I think it's there. I'd like to say there's a change, because you know there should be, but I think it's very, very slow in happening.
Yes, I think it's slow. I do believe it's been a slow change. This change, but it's slow. And you're absolutely right. You've got these, you know, comms departments, different organizations that are trying to reach out to, you know, different sectors of society, but yet nobody around the table looks like them. So it's like, well, how do you expect to actually really engage with these particular audiences if you don't even have anybody around the table to kind of give you that input? And then again, I suppose there's also that question of, you know, having someone on the table, but actually enabling them to be able to share and taking that on board, because you might have someone who's there who is your sort of token person who's there to make it look good. You need to be able to be actually able to engage and to feel empowered, emboldened to actually share, so
yeah, that's a really, really important. Sorry to cut in, but that's a really, really important point.
Yeah,
because I remember one public sector organisation that was nameless I've worked in, and the CEO had a real kind of passion for encouraging ethnic minorities to go up the ladder and so on. But actually, when it came to the recruitment piece, and you're not going wider than just a pool, and you're not actually proactively going, how can we bring in ethnic people into these higher positions so that they can be around the table? I think that's a real worry, because there's enough of us in the industry to do that. There's enough of us that are senior enough or that we can take those opportunities. So I think it's almost like, well, actually having an ethnic person that is of a lower grade, that doesn't have the platform and the voice, or isn't able to use that, isn't good enough. It's just not good. And I think organizations need to really understand that, because it's not about the numbers, it's about the influence that they can bring. So yeah, so let's stop ticking boxes and going, well, we've got the numbers right, and let's go, well, have we got the numbers right? Are we coming at it the right way? Do we have the people around the table that will bring that diversity mindset and give us something that we haven't?
Absolutely agree with you. Exactly that. Have you got the right people around the table to bring you those insights that you need, rather than just, and the influence, like you say, very key, very key. So, I appreciate that. Absolutely.
This podcast is sponsored by the PRCA's Race, Ethnicity and Equity Board. Visit prca.org.uk/REEB to find out more.
So I want to get your thoughts on allyship. What are your thoughts on allyship, and what does it mean to you? What's a good example of allyship?
I think it means, to me, someone that can advocate for you when you can't advocate for yourself, like we've touched on before. And I think that's really important. I think that you need people that can, be your crutch to have that voice. So I think that's really important. And I've been blessed to have that throughout my career. And sometimes I haven't even known it, so I haven't been part of the conversation, but I've had people advocate for me or for a piece of work I've delivered. And most recently, I had a client I'm working with who just really, I'd put a lot of work into the piece of work that I delivered, and he and the end user said, "Oh, thank you to myself and so on, so on." And he said, "No, it wasn't my work. It wasn't my work. It was all her work. It's all her work, and she's done it. And she's been across it, and she's been delivering it, and she's been brilliant." And I just thought that's really, really good. I mean, for me, I think just having someone and he's white male, and to say it wasn't me, I'm not, because I've been on the other side of things where people take credit for your work and they say theirs, and you're like, well, not really, but I just want to get on, so I'm not going to question that, and I just want to keep my head down and so on. So to have someone that done that, and that was just very, very recently, I was really touched and really honored that I've been seen, and the work that I delivered, and someone not taking credit for it, because the amount of times people do take credit for your work is you lose your fingers and toes to count it on.
It's absolutely terrible. It's happened to me a few times as well, and it got to the point where I think on one of the occasions I definitely pushed back. I just thought, this is ridiculous. You didn't do it, so please don't act like you did. So I actually said something to the person, but it happens a lot. So it is nice to hear those ones where someone could actually have the humility to say, actually, it was actually theirs, and give them the kudos. And I think that's really, really important, and a good example as well. So thank you for sharing that as well. So moving into your motivations. So what motivates you, what inspires you to kind of keep going within this sector? And, now you set up Nalini Communications, like what's inspiring and motivating you to keep going?
I think it's helping others. I think for me, it's seeing others succeed, and not necessarily being all about what I'm doing, but actually enabling that change and enabling that success. That for me motivates me. I think I've really the things I've enjoyed is where I've had conversations with people and shared, and then they've gone on and taken something that I've said and run with it, or they have believed in themselves a bit more and gone, yeah, I can do that too. And I think that's really important. I think it's almost like what you achieve is actually great, but actually what you give back and what you enable and help others achieve is actually more satisfying, because you're like paying it forward. And that for me is what motivates me. And I think we're really lucky now that we have podcasts that we can listen to. I mean, yours for a start, but also others. I'm a big fan of the Diary of a CEO, Stephen Bartlett.
Yeah,
A
love
lot.
that.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think it's about actually listening and learning and taking on that inspiration and going, that's what I'm going to do today, or I'm going to be a bit braver today, and I'm going to move a bit forward. And that's really, I think it's something that motivates me to do better. And then also my children, I think, I have two small children, and I think that I always think about what's the world I want them to see and what kind of role model am I being. And if my children came to me with this problem, in the workplace, would I say keep head down and carry on, or would I say no, actually, if it's not working for you, leave? And I think that's really important. I think it's knowing when to go. I would always say to people, you can be in a job, and the minute it doesn't feel right, and internally you're thinking this is not working for me, it's your time to go, and just know it and own it and go. And it's not easy because everyone needs a job and everyone needs to earn money, but I think it's so important. And I've had roles where I've had conversations with senior members of the team where they've gone, well, we don't think it's working out, but if you pull your socks up, and carry on, we could see how that's going. And I'm thinking, if you don't think it's working out, then you just give me the answer I need. There's no point me pulling my socks up. That's not going to go anywhere. Let's just stay and let's just leave, because I think you've got to be able to be brave and say, I'm worth more than just trying to, if what I've delivered so far doesn't prove it to you, then nothing I do from that point on is going to change or change your mind. So let's go. So I think it's giving people the courage to believe that they can do it is what kind of motivates me, I think.
That's really good. That's good. That's really helpful, and really helpful in terms of that little gem you shared about, if you feel something isn't right, then it is probably time to go. And I think that's really, really important, because a lot of people get kind of caught up and maybe sometimes worry about, what they're going to do next or whatever else. But then you're sort of suffering in this place, which isn't good for your mental health anyway. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, no, at least you can know that there are definitely opportunities of that out there to keep going ahead and make yourself happy in the process. You want to be happy at work, don't you? Because you spend so much time there. So you need to be able to kind of be brave, like you say, and take that leap at times. Absolutely. So what would you say you found most challenging so far on your journey?
I would say probably sometimes what I found the biggest challenge for me is believing in the bigger picture. So I think that's been always the challenge I've had. I've always had a kind of sense of this is the direction I'm traveling and going, and I know why I'm doing this, but it's like taking other people along with me and believing that it's all going to come good. I think I've reflected on my CV the other day and thought, gosh, I've done a lot of stuff, a lot of different stuff. And if you're talking people through it, it's almost like, wow, how did you go from your first role in project support right through to marketing, and what was that journey? And thinking about it, I was like, well, I kind of knew that everything led to something else. So when I was in project support, I did a staff away day and I really enjoyed the events. So then I found a job in events. Right. Then when I was doing the events role, I was working for a charity, and the tsunami happened in 2004. So I got exposure to crisis comms, and I then said, let's put on an event. We had like So You Want to Be a Relief Worker event for people that wanted to do relief work, because we was getting loads of calls in from people saying, I want to go out to Indonesia and help. And we're like, well, there's no infrastructure there. There's airports on a skeleton, schedule. There's no hospital. So if you go out to help, you're going to be more of a hindrance. So this event kind of helped educate people and inform people. And that kind of led me to the power of comms. And then I went on and did some contract roles and looked at kind of doing my diploma in marketing, because comms is very snobby. So you have to have your SIM, you have to have certain things to be part of the group. And I think it's almost like, well, if I'd sat down and like planned it and gone, well, I'm going to do A, B, C, it wouldn't have happened. But just instinctively, I knew I've got to do this, I've got to do that, and this led to this, and this led to that, and it's kind of been a journey that has led me to where I am today. And I have a bigger plan and a bigger picture, and that's okay, and I can trust it. But the challenge has been kind of doing it and going with it and going, it's going to work out, it'll be fine. We're all going to eat, at the end of the day, and no one's going to, there's nothing's going to happen that's going to be like terrible. Fine. So I think having that self-belief has been a real challenge, and just knowing that there's a reason for everything, and trust. And I think, spirituality, believing in God, believing in whatever it is you believe in, kind of helps you through that as well. It's that challenge. And I would say to people, have that self-belief and just own it a bit more and just go for it. Because it sort of comes back to the first story about, had I believed about PR and advertising, I probably would have circumvented some of this stuff and done it a bit sooner. So it's kind of, it is
so true. Own it, definitely. I think that's so true. That's a really, really important message. So thank you for sharing that. And now, even though we know that you are now, you're self-employed, have your own business, but with your sort of employee hat on, what was it that you would want from your employer? What makes a good working environment?
I would say the most important thing an employer can ever do for their staff, and having worked at lots of different organizations, and I've done contracting throughout my career, but this is now for me. But what I would say is valuing the people that you have. That's so important, and it's so underrated. And I think employers, they get really stuck in this mindset of, if an employee comes to them and says, okay, I'm delivering really great work, I want a pay rise, they go, well, actually, we can't afford it. And they kind of lose sense of the short-sightedness of that, where you've got someone that's delivering for you. If you pay them that 10k more, that's actually, the cost benefit of that is better than them leaving, find another job, because everyone knows that you get your pay rise pretty much when you leave and go into another role. Right. And then find another job, which then means there's a hole in your organization. There's in terms of, then you've got the recruitment cost, you've got to fill that, and then you've got to wait till that person gets up to speed and can deliver like the person that was before. And I just think it's such a shame that people aren't valued, and they are seen to be, it's an inconvenience that you've asked for a pay rise, or to be appreciated for the value you're delivering for the company. It's just so short-sighted. So I'd always say it's the value. It's about, people will work hard for you if you pay them what they think they're worth. Absolutely. And will go above and beyond. And I think, having worked in recruitment and finding really good comms people for comms roles, more than ever I've seen that, so I would say that's the really key. I think it's about being valued and being paid to, what your worth is as well. So I'd say that.
I agree with you on that one. Absolutely, definitely agree with you on that one. And what would you say, good, what does DEI look like to you? If you call it equity or equality. I prefer equity. So I don't, the diversity, equity, inclusion. What does that kind of look like for you?
It means that people around the table have a voice and they're not scared to use it. And so you're looking at people not just based on their ethnicity, but their gender and their disability and maybe their sexuality. And definitely their sexuality. And you're not shy about having those voices around the table and hearing them. And I think that's really important. I think we've got into this this way of thinking where it can be kind of a tick box exercise, and it's almost, I've worked in organizations where in one borough there was a lot of sort of black children, and it was almost like you had to find the white child to sit next to the black child when you're taking photographs, because there wasn't enough of white children in that environment. And I think it's about, actually, it's not as simple as that. It's about giving people that voice around the table and saying, hang on a minute, is this going to land well? Have we thought about how others feel about that? Have we thought about, people that are disabled, and whether that's physically or a learning difficulty, how does that land with people? Can they read it? Can they understand it? Is it plain English? So I think it's really, really important, because I think what's happened is that it's become a bit of a single issue, and it's not looked as a whole, as in everyone around the table needs to have a voice equally, but also bring their lived experiences to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you on that. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to move into your kind of proudest moments here. So can you tell us about your proudest moment? Could be work, personal, it could be, or a career highlight.
I'm just trying to think of so work one. I would say I took on a role just after going back into work after being off for maternity leave, and I found myself within like 6 weeks from being sort of going as a deputy head of comms into this sort of role of the head of comms left, and then there was a vacuum. I took on the responsibilities of being head of comms, and I just remember thinking, I had was it at that time? He had 2 small children at home, and I remember just taking on that role and just making it work and flying with it, and just sort of showing up every day, regardless of all the childcare arrangements and all the things it had to put in place to actually get into work and make that happen.
Yeah.
And I look back at that and go, that was pretty phenomenal, And I think what was amazing about that was that the role was about taking the service back in house, and it was just a really complex role, but it was also the emotion attached to that from the team. So doing a lot of internal comms, but doing a lot of external comms with residents, and just being able to deliver that and be mindful of how things would land. And then when they did come in house, it landed really well. But it was really a tough time, and I think that, and even the work that I did in lockdown. So just reassuring, because in lockdown, everyone in comms, I think, can agree that what was coming out of the government was absolutely a shambles. I mean, we were like telling us, how do we tell this to people? I don't think you realise that the messaging is actually wrong. And how do we translate this? Because are we staying away from people? Are we socialising?
Exactly. It was very confusing.
Yeah, so I think the work that I did there as well, I think are 2 things that really stand out for me as being really proud of. But I think personally, just watching the sort of trying to help those around me and watching people's careers flourish and encouraging people to take those chances, and being that sort of sounding board when someone's like, shall I take this role? I want the money, but I'm always saying to them, what about the value? Think about where it's leading you to. And I saw a great thing by Stephen Bartlett, which was, you can do any job, but make sure it's taking you to where you want to get to. So make sure there's something in there. And I think that's really true. So I think it's about, just encouraging people has been, really important to me.
Yeah, absolutely good. I think that's nice that you share that. And then what are your thoughts on how you feel like the comms industry, comms PR marketing industry will evolve over this kind of next few years? Because there's so much going on. You've got AI, which is massive. I still feel like DEI to me is kind of dwindling slightly in some organizations, which is a bit of a concern. But what are your thoughts at the moment?
I think you're right. I think it is dwindling. I think it's almost like it's had its moment and we're moving on now.
Yeah,
and
I
think
black squares have gone and that's it, isn't it? It was like, we had a black square moment and it was all a bit of a woohoo, let's get involved. And now it's like, okay, moving on.
Definitely. And I think that's the bit that we have to remind people, that we show up and we're still here and we're still needing. And I think it is important. And I think that it's also about neurodiversity as well, because I think that's getting its moment, but not in the same way. And I think sometimes a lot of the instances that happen can be linked to neurodiversity because people are undiagnosed and they don't know. Especially things around ADHD and so on. So I think there is that kind of thing as well, that we need to really make sure that we're still showing up and still reminding people that we're here and that those issues are still important. But I think comms, what I would like to see it evolve, I mean, there's a lot going on in digital space, a lot going on AI, but I'd really like it to be less snobby. I think that we're still in that kind of, you have to have this certain qualification. It's like a closed door, and I think I would like us to see us embracing more people that are not traditional, that have more to bring, that haven't done the sort of X amount of years in a company, and then that qualifies them to be good enough. I think that there's a lot of value in having people that have different journeys in the comms world. And I think that's really important. And I'd like to see some of those voices coming through more. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Absolutely. I think having different voices is important, looking at the kind of socio-economic backgrounds, different, and different trajectories. Not everyone has to come from a red brick university. They don't have to come from university at all. Maybe they can just come straight in and do some training and, and share lots of information that you have and knowledge. So I agree with you in terms of, I feel like, interestingly, when you say it's a bit snobby, I feel like that is particularly in certain sectors in particular. I feel like there are some smaller agencies now that are trying to make little waves in terms of like bringing people in and having more routes of entry. But I agree. I feel like the routes of entry still feel like they're kind of, gatekeeped to a degree. And your point on neurodiversity, I completely agree with you, because it actually throws me back to I kind of had this thought when you were saying that about neurodiversity, and I thought it's so true, because I remember being at university, and on my degree, I'd done a business communications degree. And I remember my friend of mine, she was struggling with some stuff. And it wasn't towards the end that they realized she was dyslexic. So she didn't have the support that she needed. They kept giving her really terrible grades at the time. And, it was because of the way that she was, basically, writing it out. And she had dyslexia, and they didn't know. And it was diagnosed at a later stage, but at least they actually eventually caught it. So it meant that she could get her degree and get it together. But it was very much at a later stage. So I do feel like there's more that needs to be done around that space, because even my mum, she found out at a later stage that she had dyslexia. So I feel like it's really fascinating that these things are happening, but there needs to be more done to kind of help and to also spot these signs, rather than just saying, writing someone off, like the example you gave earlier, like, oh, that person's just thick. Well, no, there's usually more going on there. So yeah, I think that's a very important part as well to think about and to kind of harness and hone.
No, you're absolutely right, Ebony. And I'll share with you. I mean, I was 7 when my primary school teacher told my parents that they think that I have dyslexia, because I couldn't read at 7. So I would have awful Ladybird, Peter and the Wolf book, and I would literally read one page, turn the page, and then forget all the words. My parents did think that I was, putting it on, and the school said, no, I think she's dyslexic. And because back then, with them being immigrants, they were like, well, we're not going to get her labelled, so we're not going to do anything about that. So they ignored it. Then I had to go and retake my maths GCSE, my A levels, and it was my first year of degree where I failed my first year, and it was like, well, either I'm stupid or I'm dyslexic. One of the two is going to work itself out. And then had the screening, and they were like, yeah, you're dyslexic. And then had the test, and then it was then identified. And so, similar to your friend at university, it was later on, and I progressed on and got a 2-1. But I think it is that sense of there's probably a really, there's a generation out there that have had those learning difficulties and are neurodiverse that haven't known and don't know still, and they are still struggling. And I think we need to help people like that along, because actually it's really important to know that we all work differently, we all see things differently, but we all have a reason, to be in the room and to bring something to the table. So I think it's really, really hard, because a lot of people, even now, having small children, the diagnosis, they don't want to diagnose. They don't want to put it down to whether it's ADHD or dyslexia or autism. There is still that shyness of it, of, well, we'd rather just let them get through school. And there's a lot of young people out there that are struggling, and I think that's going to really impact them in the workplace. So we do have to own that as a society and say these people have a place, and let's make sure we support them.
Absolutely agree with you. And like you said, it was a key point you mentioned about the labelling, and I think that's massive, because a lot of immigrant parents still, they don't want that stigma. They was very scared of labels and the stigma. And I think you're right in terms of, even now when you say schools are just like, oh, let's see how they do. Well, that's not really helpful for the child, because then the child actually will then start having confidence issues. And, what are they internalizing and thinking that they're not clever enough, or, they've got to sit next to a friend whose hands always going up, but then they're not necessarily understanding it because they see it differently. So I think it's really important that actually we do catch it at an early age, so that we are preventing, like what's happened with you or what happened with my friend going through university and putting in all this effort and putting in all this work only to not get the grades that you want because you've been undiagnosed, and then you eventually get the help. Lucky she did. But I can think of amount of people who may have fell through the cracks, who maybe have not passed their degrees or whatever else because they weren't diagnosed early enough. So it's definitely an area that needs a lot more attention, for sure. Okay. So I wanted to ask you, what key lessons have you learned throughout your career? So you can give me just maybe one or two, something.
I would say it's listen to that voice inside. I definitely say, I touched on it earlier, but I would say it again. That's been a key lesson. I think every time it hasn't worked, it's because when a door closes, another one opens. It's really cliched, but it's really true. So I think that's really, really key. I think it's having people around you that supports you and can lift you up. That's really important. And knowing that sometimes people aren't able to do that, and they will say things that you don't want to hear. and that's okay. And maybe that's, they're not right for the time that you're in. So, taking a break from that kind of friendship, if it's not really serving you, is okay, because those people come back into your life, they're meant to be in your life. So I think that's been a really key lesson as well. I'd say the other thing I would say is, don't always walk in a room and think that you won't be judged on, your gender or your ethnicity. I think it's not that you will be, but sometimes you can forget that people see you from the outside, and you might walk into the room and see people from the outside and they are seeing a different thing. And, just being aware of that. Because I think sometimes I've been a bit naive and had conversations and then reflect back and going, oh, that didn't seem quite right there, So I think it's just, it doesn't mean you walk in the room all the time and think that that's going to be the first thing they see, but they are seeing that. So just being aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point. That is definitely good lessons. Thank you for sharing those. Those are really, really helpful. And what advice would you give to young people of colour, particularly who are considering entering our industry?
I would say get a mentor or get someone that is championing you. Definitely is key. I think it's something that we don't do enough of, which is I think that what you're doing is amazing, because you're giving it out there for people to learn from. But I definitely say find someone that can help you. And even it might just be for a short amount of time, but that's really important. I think we don't do enough of bringing people through and helping people and helping one another. I think we sometimes get to the point where we're comfortable, and then, it's just about where we're going and not helping the younger generation through. So I'd definitely say it's about helping them through and mentoring, and that would be really, really good.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it's very important to, like you say, reach back and not forget and, give back essentially. And how one of my friends put it, when you get to the top, don't pull the ladder up, put it back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that happens a lot. It's almost like there's a quota here. So I'm the woman that I've got here, and I'll just pull the ladder up and not help
nobody else. Exactly.
Yeah, there's enough space for us all. So I think it's really, really important. But I think also challenging when you don't think that something's right. So say it. Don't be hostage to fortune. If you think it does feel a bit off, I think in comms we need to be able to say it. And I think for the younger people coming through, it's almost about having the confidence to say that doesn't feel right, because you need to have a because. You just can't just say it doesn't feel right. So I think it's about having the courage to do that as well.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, thank you. So we're moving into our last segment, which is mindset, which, I always love to get into mindset. How do you deal with the kind of internal mind war that we all kind of deal with? And how do you kind of manage your self-limiting beliefs?
I think there is so much out there now that you can read and learn from, and you can help to challenge your mind. So if you're thinking, okay, this is not something I'm good at, you can find a podcast, you can find a YouTube video to actually just challenge that. The TED Talk's amazing. I think that it is about constantly learning and educating and pushing back and going, actually, well, just because I've been told this for how many years doesn't mean to say that this is the truth. Because if I look at the evidence, I've done X, Y, and Z, and I wouldn't have done that if I actually believed that limiting belief. So I think it's about constantly questioning your beliefs that are limiting you. It's not something that happens overnight. And I think it's really important, because I think what happens is that we, as a society, as British people, we're not keen on therapy, we're not keen on help. We're kind of very much about, I'll just suffer and I'll just speak to my friends. And I think you have to then say, well, actually, if my career was failing, I would go and get a career coach or something, and I'd go and do a course. If my mind is trapping me, well, am I getting therapy? Am I going and doing a lifestyle course that would help take me to a better place? So I think we just have to honestly just keep pushing forward and finding things that help us to push past those limiting beliefs.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good points. Thank you. And then, of course, looking back over your career journey, would you do it all over again?
Definitely. And I probably would do it in the same way, if I'm honest. I think just what I've learned and kind of where it's led me to has been so interesting. And I've just met some amazing people in the roles I've done. And I just really enjoy working with really good people, but also just people that are just wanting the best outcome is something that's great to be part of as well. So some really good teams. So I think, yes, I would definitely do it all over again. I wouldn't change anything. There's nothing that I would think, even those experiences that have been really uncomfortable, the ones that you go, that really was painful. I think those experiences are the ones that make you better and make you stronger for it. So I would do it all over again in the same way. Definitely.
I love that. That's great. I love that. Okay, now this question, it makes me laugh depending on what we get. So what was the best and the worst advice you've been given?
Oh, yeah. It's so the best advice I've been given is just, do what feels right. So that's been the best advice. And I think that's been really helpful. And another piece of advice that I was given is you can only do 3 things a day. So don't have a to-do list that has like 10, because you can only do 3 and 3 things really well. So, so that's been quite useful actually, because we tend to write long lists of all the things we need to deliver. And I think that's been 2 really good pieces of advice. And then the worst advice I've been given is things like, you've got to try harder. I think if you're coming from a place where you're already giving it your all, and it's not appreciated, then it's not right, And when we all know when we're giving our all, and we all know when we're not, and I think that the person you are. So if you're actually giving your all, and you're rocking up at the time you're supposed to be there and so on, and you're, trying to make it happen, and that isn't appreciated, then it's like, it's not for me. So,
yeah, I think that's a good point actually, because rather than it being like, do more, it's just like, actually, I've been doing the best I can. So I like that you say that, because actually it's kind of taking that pressure off, because otherwise it's just like, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to turn someone into burnout? Like, what more do you want? If they give you their all, what else can they give you? They have nothing else to give if they give you their all. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a good point actually. Okay.
Because I think it's about fit. I think people forget that when you go into a role, it's about as much as it works for you as it does for them.
Yes.
And I think we forget that. We forget, is it the right fit? Does it work for me? Is it serving me? I think there's a lot of, oh, okay, I've got to do the best job and I've got to keep my head down and all of that. And I think it has its place. But I think it's also, does it work for me? Is it going to take me to where I want to be? And it's thinking about it in that big picture that's really important. So I think that's why I say that, because it is sometimes it just isn't right. It doesn't work out. It's fine. It's okay. It's, we're all grown-ups. It's absolutely fine. It doesn't matter, because there'll be something else with your name on it.
Absolutely. Excuse me. And I think that's a good point you said about fit as well, because actually it reminded me of like before I started doing like freelancing work and stuff, when I was doing, those sort of more permanent roles, I always had that mindset of actually, you go into a company and, they're looking at it, they're interviewing you. But when I go to the interview, in my mind, I'm like, well, I'm interviewing you too. Is this a good fit for me? So I would have questions for them. And I used to enjoy asking them questions, because I think actually, there's some companies that I've gone to and had interviews, and I've come out of the interview and felt absolutely not. This is definitely not my vibe. I don't like the way it went, or I didn't like the feel or the vibe of it. So yeah, I think that's important to remember that, you're bringing value to an organization as well. So you need to also get something back. It's a transaction. So you want to be happy. Do you fit there? Do you not? So yeah, I think that's a really good point that you mentioned that. So I appreciate you sharing that. And on to our final question. So, do you have any rules that you have implemented along your career journey? So, for example, when I was, looking for sort of permanent roles, I would always say to myself, if I cannot get promoted within, then it's fine to look out and move up. Don't just stay in an organization. I used to always find it baffling when I'd meet people who've been in an organization for like 10 years. I'd be like, my God, you spent all this time of your life in this one organization, and sometimes at the same position or whatever else. And I'd be like, this is definitely not what I want for myself. So is there any sort of rules that you implemented along your journey?
You're a woman after my own heart, because that's how I feel. When someone tells me they've been there 16 years, 20 years, whatever, I'm like, really? You've got people come and go and you're still there. Like that, I can't think of anything worse. Like that would really suffocate me. And
me too.
It just, for me, I think, I want change. I want difference. I want to wake up every day and do something that I feel that is making an impact and helping. And when that feeling goes, then I don't want to be there anymore. So it's important. So I think that's been probably one rule is kind of, am I making a difference? Am I having some impact? Am I adding value? And if it's not, then let's leave. But I also think it's that whole thing where and to that effect, actually, I've always had it like 2 years. Like 2 years is the max I've ever wanted to do in a company. It's always been like, 2 years is good enough for my CV and I'll leave. And so when I did my last role for like 4 odd years, I was like, wow, that's like the longest amount of time I've been anywhere. But I was doing different things. There was account management.
Yeah.
But, oh gosh, that would have been really boring otherwise. So it might have been longer than 4 years, but so I wasn't counting. So
because you was enjoying what you was doing, you were doing different things. Obviously, you didn't just stay in the same role. So yeah.
And that's what I would say to people. I'd say, don't ever be scared to go. It's that kind of thing where you don't have to people talk about, oh, it's got to be 2 years. They have those rules. It's got to be 2 years. And it's like, well, if it's not feeling right at month 18, that's okay. No one's going to judge you. We're lucky enough that now society is much more fluid about, how long you've been in a company. It's not as it was once upon a time where you had to have that 2 years in one company to prove that you're a good human being. You can get up every day and go to the same place.
Yeah.
We don't do that anymore. It's okay. So you can leave. So I definitely would say, it's been that kind of, I think the minimum has been 2 years, but it's always been like, it's got to feel right. And if it doesn't feel right, then I've got to go. And that's important. So that would be the first thing. And the second thing I would say is always make sure whatever you're doing in your organization, whatever you're doing for them or they're helping you with or whatever you're achieving, that it's leading to that place you want to get to. So if it is an event that gets you into your next role, if it is that kind of sense of I'm going to do a qualification that's going to take me here, you're doing that because that's really about you serving you, and that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to talk to you, Nalini. It's been amazing. So thank you for sharing your experiences with us. Now, for those who want to connect with you, can you tell them where they can find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, so Nalini Ramanah. So do link and connect with me there, and I would be happy to have conversations with people and anything that people want to know. Happy to talk more.
Brilliant, thank you. So this has been Nalini Ramanah sharing her journey with me on Gems in Comms. Thank you so much. So those who are tuned in, please know that I will be back with some more wonderful people from the world of comms very soon. So stay tuned. Thank you and bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.